Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. When I was invited to do this talk, I had to figure out what worlds colliding meant. English is my second language. And we live in a world of duality. I believe it's happening in every second. Breath in, breath out, right, left. And sometimes worlds colliding for me feels like nothing. But some other times it feels like a life-death encounter. In our minds, we're saying right, wrong, good or bad, yes, no. I was born in Venezuela, and at that time, you couldn't tell what gender the baby was going to be, and I'm number 4 or 5 siblings. And my mom was certain when the first baby was going to be born that it was going to be a girl, and her name was going to be Maria Antonia, and sure enough, Maria Antonia was born. Then number 2 came, and she was certain it was going to be a boy, and his name was going to be Richard Anthony, and Richard Anthony was born. Number 3 came, Maria Fernanda, she was born. Number 4 came, she was certain it was going to be a boy, Daniel Francisco, and I was born. She cried for days, and she felt disappointed that I wasn't the boy that she wanted. And I felt the world made me independent right away. And when I was 8 years old, that independence grew incrementally. And my mom and my dad called us to their bedroom, and they said they were getting a divorce. And I didn't cry. And I didn't cry not because I didn't want to cry. I didn't want to cry because I felt I had to be strong. I couldn't crumble. They needed me. And that's how I started living life for others, putting others before myself. When I was 17 years old, I went to law school. Justice was really important to me. And to this day, justice is really, really important to me. And when I was in my 4th year of law school, one night, I didn't have a ride home, and I was asking people, can you give me a ride home? Can you give me a ride home? And it was so hard that night. And somebody said, I can drop you somewhere. And they dropped me at a bus stop. And it was 11 at night. And I was standing in the bus stop, they dropped me off. And I had a huge pile of ridiculous books and papers of law school. And I was standing there, and I realized, this is such a bad idea. This is not good. And so I started walking, crossing a bridge, to find a phone to call someone to pick me up. And as I was walking in the bridge with my big pile of papers, suddenly I felt the force. And the next thing I know, I am lying down underneath the bridge with a man covering my mouth on top of me. I remember time stopped and it got really, really slow. And he took me deep into the bridge, into the darkness, and he set me there with him, and he asked for all my belongings, and papers were all over the place. I remember looking at the papers flying in slow motion. And he was definitely not in his straight mind. And as I was sitting there with him, I realized this man wants something of me that I'm not willing to give him. And I realized in that moment I had an image of my family finding out the next morning that my body was found on a sidewalk. I realized I was going to die. And as I had the image in my mind of my family finding this out, that what happened to Tataya, I thought to myself, they don't deserve this. This is not fair to them. But I knew I could handle it because I was strong. And I remember in that moment my mom telling a story of this therapist that was in a parking lot, and she was going to get raped, a guy got to her, and that she pretended to play along and to be his friend. And that's exactly what I did. I talked for hours and hours and hours. And that night, that man dropped me at my house in a taxi, and we waved goodbye. Living life for others that night saved my life. But it wasn't like that in other areas of my life. I graduated as a lawyer, and I felt pretty successful. I felt seen, I felt powerful, and I made my parents really, really proud, especially my dad. And when I was 24 years old, I got married in Venezuela. Two things happened right after. Because my husband was very passionate about his work, he was an art director, I realized there was something missing in me, something lacking that I was longing, and I would watch him and his friends get together and talk for hours and get lost in their conversations of work. And I would sit down and go, wow, when is it gonna be the day that I'm gonna get lost in hours and feel passionate, fall in love with what I do? In the meantime, I was sitting at my desk, looking at the calendar, marking weekends, holidays. As I was struggling with this, feeling the lack, I found out that my husband was being unfaithful to me, and my world crumbled. Everything that I thought it was not anymore. All that was real to me didn't exist, and I felt like the floor was taken out of my feet, and I felt disoriented. Suddenly I didn't know who I was. My identity all along came from external things. So right after I was figuring out what to do with my life, and I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, a dear friend of mine, on the phone, and she said, Tataya, you've always wanted to travel the world. This is your time. Why not? And I remember talking to her on the phone, thinking, wow, I feel petrified, because that means I have to let go of everything that's secure to me, my job, my house, my car, what I had. And I did. I hired this lady, and in a weekend, she sold everything I had, every spoon, every furniture, every towel. I sold my car, and I left with a backpack on my shoulders to India. And all I knew was that I just needed to listen to my inner voice. I didn't know who I was anymore, right? But I just knew I just had to dig in. And I went to India to become a yoga instructor. And I traveled for a couple of years in that journey of who am I. And after a couple of years, I found myself back in Venezuela. It was fun. I went to Paris and Spain and Italy. And then I was back home. And when I went back home, I felt defeated. I was contemplating all the travels that I did, but I had nothing, like literally, I had no belongings. Yeah. And my sister wanted to help me, and she invited me to Colorado to further my yoga studies. And so I went to Colorado, and in 2004, I got married to my husband, Thomas. And in 2006, we came to Lincoln, Nebraska. We have 3 beautiful, amazing children, and we have a yoga studio. We have a business that every day reflects all those years of journey of knowing what you love, or of digging deep. And our mission is to empower people to live a life you love. And I feel so grateful because every year we get to guide people into their own hero's journey through our yoga teacher training program. going back to worlds colliding, as I contemplated my story and where it brought me was, there's a point where worlds cease to collide. And that point in yoga, we call it the present moment. And in my own spiritual journey, I call it being in the presence of God. And when that happens, the search is over. There's harmony, there's love, and like the hero's journey, you find yourself back home to you. And all that I was looking for, all those years, it was in me all along. So I want to finish by saying that what I've learned and what I want to share and leave kind of here and here and here is, instead of doing something and hoping that you fall in love with it at some point, take a moment to figure out what do you love, what are you passionate about, and then make that your life. Thank you.